Finland, which has ranked as the happiest country in the world for 8 consecutive years, is still struggling with one of the highest suicide rates in Europe. With a suicide rate of 15.7 deaths per 100k deaths, it's on number 8 in Europe and on 31st in the whole world, according to an OECD research published in 2019. Finland has the highest rate of mental diseases in the EU, at 18.8%. This image of Finland, the happiest nation, covers up the existing challenges in the country, which are mostly connected to suicide and mental health problems. According to figures from 1990, Finland had a difficult situation in terms of suicide, with numbers climbing since 1945. It was a post-war era for Finland, where men came back from the front of the war traumatized, which had a significant impact on the country.
Gained little.
But now that's not the case. The country has been stable for decades now and is one of the most developed in the world. Suicide rates have dropped in recent years, although they remain higher than the EU average. So then how is Finland the happiest country in the world? Finnish people are very trustworthy, and there are a lot of facilities from the government. These two things show both sectors of society are well developed and well settled, which could explain the top position of Finland in the annual happiness rankings. Now let's discuss what specific factors keep the mental health crisis so persistent. First of all, there is the taboo. In a 1993 CNN story, 15-year-old Petra stated she attempted suicide numerous times as she was desperate and asking for help. According to her, while psychiatrists were accessible via phone, there was no hotline for suicide. But nowadays, the situation is no more like that. In a Yle article from 2015, Ritva, the wife of a man who committed suicide, says that in Finland, the bar for receiving assistance is quite low. It is possible to visit a psychiatrist without making an appointment. Because assistance is so readily available, the issue cannot be connected to the lack of resources. Instead, she blames it on suicide and mental health being a taboo in Finland. According to Ritva, saying you have depression out loud is regarded as a weakness and humiliation. The president of the Finnish Psychiatric Association, Erkki T. Iso-Metsä, says suicide is taboo in some ways. He notes, people do not want to hear you talking about suicide, because it is a terrible, anxiety-provoking thing. People get distressed when they hear someone they know thinks about suicide. So in that sense, it is still a taboo because it is an issue that is difficult to communicate about. This cultural problem is combined with the extreme climate, which brings us to the second issue, dark winter, mood, and vitamin D. Generally, weather can have a big influence on our mood and health, and Finns are not an exception. Finland is a great country if you want to connect with nature in the golden colors of autumn. But in winter, these colors just disappear, and all you are left with are long, dark days. Adding to this, the small talks, rare display of emotions, and privacy are typical Finnish characteristics. According to a Yle article, approximately 12% of Finns have true seasonal affective disorder, SAD, and 1 in every 10 people has symptoms that are comparable to SAD throughout the winter. Research shows a correlation between suicide and solar radiation from November to March, meaning the suicide risks vary, and the risk is greater in winter because of the lack of sunshine. Men are also more susceptible to solar radiation variations than women. The sun can be a double-edged sword as well. In a short period, more sunlight may raise suicide risk, while in a longer period, it may reduce the risk. Iso-Metsä agrees that sunshine has an impact on our mental health and mood, but the impact is not strong, arguing, in general, our lives are still quite stable. Finally, there is the pressure. The happiest country in the world. Sounds amazing, but what do the people with mental health issues feel like when they hear these words? In a BBC article, Kirsi Marja, a respondent diagnosed with depression in her adolescence, discusses the pressure this title places on her. She says she feels like she is not allowed to feel depressed, since she is living in Finland, where general living standards are high. John Juntura, a young doctor, argues that depression is not always connected to the circumstances. You can have a happy life but still feel unhappy. This pressure and the stigma around suicide make it hard for people to verbalize their emotions. Only a few people mention suicide during their sessions with psychiatrists right before they do it. Iso-Metsä says the main reason is that the act of suicide means taking your life into your own hands. A person who makes such a decision does not want other people to know about it and try to change the decision. He concludes, there are limits to what we can do when it comes to suicide. We cannot read anyone's thoughts. Now let's talk about this happiness ranking itself. You've heard about countries being ranked on the list of happiest countries in the world. This list is most likely from the World Happiness Report. The WHR is an annual publication by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which ranks countries by happiness score. The score is based on the average answer to this question. Please imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom of the ladder represents the worst possible life for you. On which step of the ladder would you say you personally feel you stand at this time? Still, for some researchers, the study is controversial. According to them, if we look at the outpouring of positive emotions, countries like Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Paraguay are the happiest, while Nordic countries are somewhere near the end of the list. Now let me show you the relation between happiness and suicide. Isn't it pretty weird? The data is quite crazy. There seems to be a strong correlation between the score given in the World Happiness Report and suicide rates, with the happiest countries, on average, having a suicide rate of over twice as much as the least happy countries. Many unhappy countries really do have a low number of suicides, and many happy countries have a high number. Finland, for example, has a suicide rate of 14.9, while Peru, ranked 63rd happiest in the 2016 report, had a suicide rate of 4.9. Interesting to note is the staggeringly low suicide rate of 1.9, according to World Bank data, for Syria, in 2016, a country that had been in civil war for 5 years at that point. For comparison, Austria has a suicide rate of 14.3 and the United States a rate of 15.3. What about money? If we compare GDP per capita and suicide rates, we find poorer countries, countries that almost no one in the Western world wants to live in, really do tend to have lower rates of suicide. So what could be the reason behind this? Being depressed while comparatively wealthy can be very different from being depressed while comparatively poor. If you are unhappy and poor, the solution might seem simple: obtain money. People in poorer, less happy countries might not be committing suicide because they have hope for a better, richer future. Conversely, if you are in a very wealthy country and you feel that you are a failure, what options do you have? The solutions are not nearly as simple, as you'll consider it a personal failure, unlike those in poorer countries who will put it all on the government and circumstances. Ultimately, I think the trend is real. As countries become better, wealthier, for most, new problems arise that are much more difficult to deal with. When creature comforts are taken care of and your life still sucks, then often the only solution seems to be suicide. Well, there is another thing: maybe this whole ranking of suicide rate is itself wrong. I think that poorer countries, on average, might simply not track suicides as reliably as wealthier countries, either due to cultural reasons or financial restraints. So they appear lower in the chart. Whatever. Our problem remains unaffected by this, even if it's true. So where can we look for solutions? Prevention of suicide involves both improving present efforts and introducing new methods. Therefore, in 2020, the government of Finland introduced a National Suicide Prevention Program (NSPP). The program is aimed at providing better support for people with suicidal thoughts, fighting the existing taboo in society, being perceived as attention seekers if they try to commit suicide, and providing better low-threshold services during a crisis. According to Isa Metzer, the attitude toward people who attempt suicide is a serious issue, and he is glad it is mentioned in the program. He says, when people who attempted suicide go to emergency hospitals, they are seen in a negative light by the doctors and nurses because hospitals are full of people with cardiac problems, stomach pain, and other physical issues. Therefore, people with suicidal attempts are seen as those who have self-inflicted problems, which causes negative emotions. He notes the situation is different if they go to psychiatric hospitals because psychiatrists are professionals and know how to act in this situation. However, there are still certain issues that need to be addressed. Isa Metzer argues that right now, the NSPP is targeted to the general well-being of the population. What we need to do is target these resources to especially high-risk groups, where the impact would be the highest, he says, like teenagers and young adults, because suicide accounts for 1/3 of the deaths in people aged 15 to 24. Also, while women are reportedly more prone to suicidal thoughts, rates of suicide are higher among men, which has been described as a silent epidemic. In 2021, the global rate of suicide deaths for men was 12.3 per 100,000, more than double the rate for women, which stood at 5.9 per 100,000. This is because men keep to themselves and don't express their emotion since they were taught they're men who are supposed to be strong. Which is good, but as nothing is best, so we can see its dark side through higher suicide rate in them. Discussing your problems with the right people really relieves you, but the way our culture has developed, it doesn't give men much space. There are a lot of organizations that provide people with support, information, and different activities about mental health and well-being. There is a big room for development, and we will see the positive effects of the gradual changes in the future. Happiness and suicide are not simple matters, and attempting to give things like happiness for an entire country a single number will leave out parts of the picture. Of course, it is silly to think that a single number like a happiness score could completely explain something as complex as human happiness. Things like happiness and suicide are complicated. But with this knowledge in mind, we should be careful. Is a wealthier society really a better society? We need to be conscious of our actions. Traditional conceptions of progress may have unforeseen consequences. My only real remark is that we must watch where we step.